Hello, everyone. Yet once again, it's another day of fresh grace and mercy. This is the Guilt, Grace, Gratitude podcast, sponsored by Logos Bible Software, where we bridge the gap to Reformed Christian theology for your listening pleasure. And today we're doing a book club episode with Christopher Watkin on his new book, Biblical Critical Theory: How the Bible's Unfolding Story Makes Sense of Modern Life and Culture. Very exciting topic. Great book. We're going to be talking about it here in a few moments. Peter and I are going to ask him some questions as usual for these book club episodes. As a reminder, on our show notes, a few links. One is for Zondervan, so if the publisher of this book. So if you click that link, it'll take you to this book, and please get it for yourself. And then also some links that will be helpful guiding you to a Reformed or confessional church near your area. So you hit that link and you type in your zip code, and the closest Reformed or confessional churches near you come up. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to Peter or myself, or you can have questions or comments about really anything in general. You can contact us at guiltgracepod@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram, our social media platforms, at guiltgracepod. Both handles the same for both. And then also, you heard me mention Logos Bible Software. They are our main sponsor. So thank you, Logos Bible Software. They're what we call our bridge builders, our sponsors. And so halfway through this episode, you'll hear some words from some of our other sponsors, aka bridge builders, and then a little bit more information about Zondervan as well. And then also, if you're an individual and you want to be a bridge builder, you can hit that Patreon link and see the different levels of giving just to keep our show moving forward with increased bandwidth and increased demand and equipment. Today we might sound a little different. We have, because of the thanks to our sponsors, we got new microphones here. So we're upgrading in the podcast world. So I'll let Peter further introduce Christopher Watkin today.
Yeah, we have Dr. Christopher Watkin, who's a senior lecturer in French studies at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. He's a scholar with international reputation in an area of modern and contemporary European thought, atheism, the relationship between the Bible and philosophy. His published work runs the spectrum from academic monographs on contemporary philosophy to books written for general readers, both Christian and secular, and include Difficult Atheism, from Plato to Postmodernism, great thinkers, Jacques Derrida, and others. And we will talk about some of these relationships on this episode. And it's a pleasure to have you on, Dr. Watkin.
Peter, Nick, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely, yeah. It's our pleasures. Before we start our first question, just let us know how things are going in Melbourne. I think this is the second straight interview. We actually talked to Dr. Michael Bird this past Thursday.
That's right.
And he's from Melbourne too. He's actually in Melbourne. So we have two Melbourne people in the same time. This is crazy for us.
It's been a big weekend in Melbourne. We had our AFL grand final last weekend.
Okay.
And my team, the Geelong Cats, actually won.
So there you go.
Riding a high at the moment.
Awesome. That's cool. Yeah. So for those who may not know you or your work, maybe this is the first time they've been introduced to you. They haven't heard you before. Maybe let our listeners know a little bit about yourself, your background, and your current work.
Sure. I'm a Yorkshireman, grew up in the UK, became a Christian when I was 15 years old.
Okay.
And went up to university to study French and German in a really heavily literature and philosophy-based course.
Okay.
And stuck around at university through a postdoc and then lectured for a couple of years there, and wrote a PhD in 3 French philosophers, married a wonderful Australian lady, Alison, and moved over here in Melbourne in 2011, where I've been teaching at Monash University ever since, and writing, I guess, 2 sorts of books, really. The sort of standard academic monographs. I've written one on atheism, one on what is a human being, and one on a really obscure French philosopher that no one's ever heard of. And
which philosopher?
He's called Michel Serres.
Okay.
I think he's really important, but
Okay.
he's not up there in terms of name recognition with people like Derrida or Foucault.
Yeah.
Yet. And
Yeah.
I'm working on it.
You'll get him famous again.
That's right. I've also been writing some Christian books. So I wrote 3 little books on Derrida, Foucault, and Deleuze, trying to work out how to think about them from a Christian point of view. And then this longer book that's just about to come out, Biblical Critical Theory.
That's right.
Where I try and take a sweep from Genesis to Revelation and think about culture through the lens of biblical theology.
Awesome. Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, that I guess leads into my question. What led to writing this book in particular, and how did you get into cultural philosophies and their intersection with a biblical worldview?
I guess it's the book that I would have really loved to have read as an undergraduate. So, you imagine me there in a literature and philosophy course, grappling with all these different theories and approaches.
Yeah. You went to Cambridge, correct?
That's right. Yeah. Jesus College, Cambridge.
Yeah. If you want to imagine, Dr. Watkin at Cambridge in the grounds of a university doing this, then by all means.
That's right. In my little old room.
Yep.
And as a relatively new Christian as well. And just trying to bring those two worlds into conversation with each other, I guess. And I was looking around for books that took the intellectual world that I was engaging with in my course seriously and that really understood it, but that also took the Bible seriously and came at it from a confessional point of view. And I couldn't really at that time find much out there. A lot of the books on philosophy by Christians were dealing with more analytic philosophy, Alvin Plantinga, people like that, which was fantastic, but it wasn't the philosophy I was studying, so it wasn't hugely useful to me. And, there were authors like Cornelius Van Til out there, Oliver O'Donovan, John Milbank, who were moving in that direction, but there was nothing really that engaged at length with the writers that I was looking at. And so I suppose the genesis of the book was wanting to write that book, given that I couldn't find it anywhere.
Yeah. And reading your bio, and I think reading a little bit more about you beyond this, curious with a background in European language, you studied French and German in college and then doctoral level as well. Literature and thought, what got you into, how'd you move from there to kind of cultural philosophies and Christian engagement?
It wasn't so much of a jump as it might sound in the way that you've just framed it.
I think people might think it's a jump, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So my course was already dealing with a lot of cultural theory. There was one unit, it was my favorite unit during my whole time as an undergraduate, called Modern Critical Theory. And every week we'd look at a new cultural theory. So there was a week on Derrida, a week on Deleuze, a week on Foucault, a week on post-colonialism, I think.
Yeah, which are kind of the hot topics and hot names right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And each of these approaches would give you a way of looking at the world. It would make some things in the world really obvious and other things would sort of fade into the background. It'd give you a way of deciding, what you want to praise out there in the world and what you want to condemn. And I, as I was reading the Bible and going to a good Bible teaching church on Sundays, it struck me that, the Bible is doing a similar sort of thing. It's not the only thing the Bible's doing, of course. But the Bible is making certain things out there in the world visible. The widows and the orphans, for example, or the glory of God in creation. It's drawing attention to certain things. And it's giving you a framework in which certain things become praiseworthy, like God's name or God's glory, and certain things become to be condemned. And it frustrated me, I guess, that the Bible had no seat at the table when all these different cultural theories were being discussed. And the more I thought, the more I was convinced that the Bible really does have some fresh and quite surprising ideas from a secular point of view to offer to these debates that were raging in this unit that I was studying, modern critical theory. And so part of what I'm trying to do in the book is to bring the Bible to that table, into that conversation, and to see what it's contributing, what a biblical view of the world contributes to this theoretical sort of to and fro, that's going on in culture.
Yeah, before next question, just curious, we didn't send you these before, but since you read these in college, you read these for doctorate, postdoctorate, and all that, and I think they were popular a while back, but they've kind of regained in popularity more so lately. I don't know if you know, or if you have any kind of feel for what's kind of brought them back up in popularity more recently, where I think Christians for the first time are really reading these people for the first time versus when they wrote back in the 80s or 70s or whatever, whenever it may have been.
I'm not. So from my neck of the woods, they've never really gone out of fashion. There's been a steady stream of books on these thinkers over the years.
Yeah.
I wonder if part of what's happening is that with the rise to prominence of tendencies like critical race theory, people are returning to these texts and trying to find the genealogy of these contemporary critical theories. It might be that that's part of what's happening.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I think Christians are wrestling with these things, although they've been there for a while and the academics have gone through it. I think Christians are kind of discovering them for the first time and wondering, what do I do with some of these people? How do I read these? How do I interact with these?
Yeah, and like you've said before, everything's already there in the Bible, and the Bible should be a part of the conversation and at the same table with discussions about philosophy and culture. And because when it comes down to it, it's deep, meaningful questions human beings have always had, and the Bible definitely addresses those. I mean, that's very clear. So it's great that you bring this book out there to more remind us, not so much introduce us because it's already been there, but remind us, point us back to the Bible, because it's okay to engage with the culture and drive us back to the Bible. So I think so many people try to pit the Bible against culture and pit it against each other, and you're like, no, let's try to help engage with culture, help these discussions with the Bible. It looked like you're about to say something, so
just to, I certainly am, Nick. I don't think it's a choice between saying that the Bible contradicts culture or saying, in theological language, that there's an antithesis between them, and saying that the Bible has something to contribute to the culture. And I wonder if that's part of where Christians have got it wrong, that we feel that we've got to choose one of those.
Right.
Yeah.
We've either got to say the Bible and the culture are in an antithetical relationship.
Yeah.
Or we've got to say that the Bible's got some really interesting things to contribute. And I think that the biblical model that shows the inadequacy of that is 1 Corinthians 1. And if you look at what Paul is doing with Greek wisdom and the Jewish demand for signs and power in that passage, he's doing both. Like, there's an absolute antithesis between what he's calling God's foolishness and human wisdom. That there's no sense in which God's wisdom is just like the Greek wisdom, only a little bit more or a little bit better. That there's a rupture between the two.
Yeah.
So he's 100% behind the antithesis camp.
Yeah.
The people are saying that the Bible is not like the culture. There's a disjunction between the two. But then in the same passage, he goes on to say, doesn't he, that the wisdom, the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. So he's comparing the two, and he's saying God's is better. And so he's saying, that what the Greeks are looking for in their wisdom, but can't find the fullness of in the way that they're looking for it, that the fullness of that is actually found, strangely, paradoxically, in the foolishness of the cross. And if the Greeks would only look in the last place they'd ever think of finding wisdom, the foolishness of a man hanging up on a cross, they'd find that the fullness of what they're searching for. And so, the fulfillment people, sort of dance up and down on that verse and say, look, the Bible is pointing the culture in the right way and is fulfilling the aspirations of the culture. But it's both, isn't it? And it's the moment that we divide antithesis from fulfillment, I think, that we've already created a false dichotomy, and we've got ourselves into all sorts of trouble in terms of cultural criticisms, because you can't pick just one of those.
Yeah.
And expect it to be adequate, divided off from the other one.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Totally.
good clarification there. And this is a incredibly unique book, and you trace redemptive themes structurally from beginning to end, Genesis to Revelation. So very helpful, with a focus on modern cultural engagement throughout. And so how does the redemptive storyline of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation help us better engage with modern cultural narratives? We understand you're not going to answer all 66 books in the Bible, but
please, answer thoroughly for the next 5 hours.
Yeah. Well, in a sentence, no. I don't know whether the book is that unique, actually. Just to go back to that part of the question, I'm trying to use as a model Augustine's City of God, because I think he does this brilliantly. He takes this Genesis to Revelation approach as well in the second half of the City of God. And what he's doing, as I understand it, is he's trying to bring the whole of the biblical story to bear on the whole of late Roman culture. So he's not just picking one or two aspects of Hellenistic culture and saying, let's do a demolition job on this Roman idea or on that part of society. He's saying, let's try and look at the whole of it. The civil religion, the games, the Colosseum, everything. And let's try and bring the whole of the Bible to bear on that. And he does it astonishingly with a depth of insight that I'm not going to pretend to be anywhere near.
I don't think.
Not.
Even though he wrote that in 400 something AD, I don't think it's been eclipsed by any modern scholar since Augustine.
No, I completely agree. Right. I completely agree. And but so what I'm trying to do is then take that as a model and say, well, if we're going to bring the whole of the Bible to bear on the whole of late modern culture, what might that look like? And I take, therefore, what sometimes in theological circles is called, your creation, fall, redemption, consummation framework, which I'm persuaded is really quite fresh and unique in terms of critical theories, of cultural theories, because it temporalizes culture, to use a slightly clumsy phrase. And so
I see what you're saying.
For a lot of cultural theories, the way things are now is the way that they've always been. There's gradual changes, but there's no dramatic ruptures in the way things are, and it's the way they'll always be as well. And the problem with that, and the Marxists knew this, Theodor Adorno knew this, is that gives you no standpoint from which to look at society and critique it. He calls it a standpoint of redemption. If you're in the society and it's always been as it is and it always will be as it is, well, then that's normal. And why would you expect it? How can you expect it to be different? But of course, what the creation, fall, redemption, consummation framework gives you is a reading of reality where the way things are now is not how they've always been, and it's not how they were meant to be, and also, thank goodness, it's not how they will be. And that gives you this standpoint from which to look at contemporary reality and critique it meaningfully, with a set of values and with the view that doesn't belong entirely to the present. We're not bootstrapping ourselves to a position where we can critique reality. Because we have what Adorno calls the standpoint of redemption. The new heavens and the new earth provide a perspective to be able to look at the way things are now and say, although the goodness of creation has by no means been eradicated, things are not good. Human beings are not as we ought to be. Our intentions in the world, our treatment of the natural world, our treatment of each other is not as it ought to be. And from a biblical point of view, we have ground upon which to stand to say that.
Yeah. And maybe before my next question, just it helps. Maybe a theological example of what you're saying is, I think I've heard you say this before, but maybe I'm paraphrasing, so correct me if I'm wrong. It's, everything in creation God made good originally. So everything that we see has some goodness in it. And the thing about evil is evil doesn't create anything. Evil distorts creation. Evil distorts what was good and what is good. So
Or in
even
Augustine's words, the privation of good. That's what he talks about in his Confessions in the City of God too.
Yeah, amen. Yeah. So maybe can you double down on like what I'm saying as far as everything God created was good. So creation in itself is good, but evil that it doesn't create anything. Evil just comes in and distorts.
Yeah. So the principle there, I think, is what, when Jesus says only God is good. So Christians do have a measure of what is absolutely good, but it's not a measure that's located within the created order. There's nothing we can look to within creation and say that is my absolute measure of what is good, because only God is good and he's outside the creation.
Right.
And similarly, there's nothing within the created order, within human culture, let's say, that is utterly and unremittingly and exhaustively evil, because only the devil is that. And what that does is it gives Christians a wonderful openness and discerning attitude to the whole of culture, because what it predisposes us to expect when we encounter a cultural artifact or an event or a movement or anything is that there's going to be some echoes in it of God's good creation, because nothing is utterly evil within the created order. But it also predisposes us to expect it's going to be twisted or damaged or partial in some way. And this goes for everything. It goes for every political movement. It goes for the church itself, insofar as it's in its sense that it's a human institution. And therefore, Christians can't just simply accept anything without having thought about it carefully, because of this mixture of good and twistedness that's going to be in it. And nor can we simply, without having engaged with it, reject anything for the same reason.
Yeah.
But if you get your measure of what's good and evil from something inside the created order, which you have to do if you're going to have a functioning ethics and you don't believe that there's anything apart from this world, then there are some things that you're going to have to close your mind to, on pain of losing your measure of what's good and evil. So, for example, if your ideology dictates that rationality is the measure of good and superstition is evil, or the historically speaking, the proletariat is good and the bourgeoisie is evil, or the free market is good and regulation is evil, then you're going to have to close your mind when you come to considering those things themselves. Otherwise, you're going to lose your measure. But the Christian doesn't have to close her mind. The Christian can be open to considering everything within creation on its merits, because her measure of what's good and evil isn't inside the created order at all. I just think that's a wonderfully freeing, empowering basis on which to go out into the world as Christians and to think carefully about everything that we come across.
Yeah. And what rings in my ears too is that a really good example is also sex. I mean, God made sex good and pure and meant for a reason, and culture has totally, and evil has distorted it quite a bit, and we've seen that in our culture as well. But here's a question for me, my last question. I'll let Peter kind of go from here. So the provisional title of your book, I don't know if the audience knows this, back in November 2021 was Christian Cultural Engagement. And the final title of your book was changed to Biblical Critical Theory. Whether this was your choice or the editors, we never really know until we talk to an author. Like, whose choice was it? There's a play on the currently divisive role of critical race theory in today's society. So How do you engage with these modern cultural philosophies or lens into modern life?
To answer the immediate question there first, I proposed biblical critical theory along with a bunch of other titles, and the publishers loved it. So it was a joint decision between us. I really like it for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think it subtly makes the point that so let me circle back to this unit I did as an undergraduate, modern critical theory.
Yeah.
It wasn't about critical race theory, and it wasn't about the Frankfurt school that often gets associated with critical theory, Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse, and so forth. It was about a broader sense of critical theory, which means ways of looking at the world that draw attention to certain things and make certain things valuable, and make certain ways of being in the world viable. And that's what all these different people, Foucault and Deleuze and Derrida and everyone, are doing. And I wonder whether there's a danger at the moment that we're losing that wider sense of what critical theory is and focusing merely on one variety of it. And I think to the extent that we're doing that, we're preventing ourselves from seeing what's going on in culture more broadly. And so part of what I like about the title Biblical Critical Theory is that it's reclaiming that broader sense of what critical theory has meant, but has recently, because of various sort of political events, become somewhat obscured by a narrower sense. I also love it because it's doing what Augustine does again in the City of God. This is one of my favorite Augustine stories. So the very first word of the original Latin of the first chapter of Augustine's City of God is the word gloriosissimam, most glorious. So he starts off, most glorious is the City of God. And we thought, fair enough, that doesn't seem terribly controversial to me. But of course, that the idea of glory, the value of glory, was Rome's way of looking at itself and seeing itself as superior to all, the other nations.
Exactly.
But Roman glory is not a Christian idea. The glory of Rome is the way that it sort of rolls out its imperial might and crushes its enemies and makes everybody serve it and sort of, gains tribute. It's not a Christian idea. So what on earth then we are, within our rights to ask, is Augustine doing by using that word to describe the City of God and putting it as a very first word of the City of God? And I think what he's doing is the 1 Corinthians 1 thing again. He's saying, you search after glory, you Romans. This is what you really, really want. This is what you pride yourselves on. This is your identity. Well, if you want the fullness of what you're searching for, you actually need to come to the place that you'd least think of finding it, which is this City of God that you deride and that you think is responsible for the demise of Rome. And I think that there's a similar argument to be made for critical theories today. So what Augustine is doing for glory, I think the Bible also does for justice, which is one of the main values of various different critical theories. And in the same way that
because they're rightly concerned for some of these things, but like you said, there's a bigger narrative that some of them are missing.
Yeah. And in the same way that Roman glory is not the same thing as the glory of the City of God.
Yeah.
And yet Augustine can still say most glorious is the City of God, knowing how that will be misheard by Roman ears because he's trying to make that point. I think that the way to do that today is to say that actually what these critical theories are searching for is most fully embodied in the Bible that they think is part of the problem they're trying to address. And that if you really want to be serious about looking for justice in its fullness, then perhaps you need to go to the last place you'd think of looking for it, which is the Bible that you think is the source of so much oppression and discrimination. So it's the same move. It's the same move again, and that's what I like about this title, Biblical Critical Theory, that it's repeating this Pauline and this Augustinian gesture.
Yeah, that's really helpful, because I've been preaching through. I just started Amos, the prophet Amos, and he's usually claimed, I think rightly so, as the prophet that's most concerned with justice, with righteousness, with oppressing the poor. And so it gets used by kind of, you can quote unquote both sides for, oh, it's just temporal justice. No, this is holy justice. But I think what you're saying makes sense, because he is concerned with this, but he's concerned ultimately with the justice that the Lord proclaims on the earth when he comes back and makes all things right, not merely the temporary justice that we're looking for, though it's good to look for temporary justice. He doesn't divorce it from this overarching, you can call it eschatological or like end times justice that comes in. That makes sense for what people are doing.
And it comes back again to this core idea that you've got to have both antithesis and fulfillment. If you lose one of those, then you're going to go off track. But if you can keep them together, like Augustine does and like Paul does, then I think that's a brilliant basis for cultural critique.
Yeah. So maybe to help ground some listeners before my next question, if you can introduce a couple of these major thinkers that you interact with in the book and some of these major theories, just so they kind of get a taste of, okay, this is what he's talking about. This is who he's talking about. Some of the trends, maybe some people that they may know, some people they may not know, and the trends that they didn't start, but they kind of imbibe.
Okay. I talk regularly, I think, about early modern thinkers like Descartes and Hobbes.
Okay.
So in the modern period, you've got the emergence of a mechanistic worldview. So as Hobbes says in the opening of his Leviathan, really everything, including human beings, is just cogs and springs and wheels. We can understand ourselves as machines. And I come back to that idea a number of times and look at it from various different biblical points of view. More recently, I engage with the usual sort of postmodern suspects. We've got Foucault in there, Derrida and Deleuze again, and I sort of Kant. So the history of philosophy courses and history of political thought courses will touch on many of the people that I'm engaging with.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think that helps ground some of the names and some of the movements. So two related questions. Since this has been your work and you've engaged with this for quite a while before writing this book, was there a chapter you wrote that you thought like, oh, that was, I didn't expect to kind of research this or to come out with this, or that was the most interesting chapter for you to write or enlightening for you to write? And what do you think might surprise some of your readers when they read your book?
What a wonderful question. Time and again, I started off research for a chapter thinking, I'm not sure there's a great deal to say here. I'm not sure there's a lot of material for cultural critique in this particular bit of the Bible, which says much more about me than about the Bible, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But time and again, the more digging I did, the more interacting I did with the text themselves and with sort of commentaries on that, I thought, my goodness, how am I going to fit everything into the space that I've got, which is probably why the book ended up being so long. So I thought the section on the prophets was going to be, a few pages at the end of another chapter. And then I started reading. I thought, oh my goodness, like the whole institution of prophecy in the Bible is such a model of an authority, a locus of authority within a society that's not in power. So of authority without power. And just how anarchic it is. Like there's no school of prophets apart from Elisha and Elijah. There's no handing down of the prophetic gift. God is calling these prophets up. Some of them are farmers, some of them are in courts, some of them are at the city gates. They're just anyone.
Yeah, Amos is a shepherd from Tekoa. They're like, you're not expecting these people to be prophets.
Yeah. And just things like that, and anyone who knew the Bible better than I do would have known already. And the more you dig into that, the more that just opens itself up as an entry into a whole series of cultural questions. And the same with Revelation. I'd never read the book of Revelation as a political text in the way that I was brought to for this project. I'm not talking about sort of end time stuff, but as a trenchant, powerful critique of what sometimes gets called the military industrial complex. And just brilliantly incisive resources for the way that Christians are to live in the last days, sort of lifting the veil of society to show what its ugly underbelly is like. All those sort of things were new to me largely in Revelation, and that was just a joy to discover. You know, sometimes when you're reading something, you get that thrill, don't you? You know, you feel as though you're stepping into it's the Narnia moment. You know, you're going through the cupboard. Oh my goodness, there's a lamppost of Mr. Tumnus. There were quite a few of those moments, and Revelation was definitely one of them. What an amazing book.
Yeah. And what do you think? What do you suspect? Because it may be different than what actually happens. What do you suspect may surprise some of your readers when reading your book?
I hope that they'll be surprised by how fresh and incisive the Bible is, and how the best cultural critique pushes deeper and deeper and deeper into the Bible, rather than feeling that it's got to sort of take a step back from the Bible and content itself with, theological categories at one remove, or that it's got, in order to become culturally relevant, you have to sort of slightly loosen your grasp on biblical faithfulness. I would love readers to be surprised and thrilled, thinking, in order to become better cultural critics, we need to press deeper into the text of the Bible, rather than sort of sit more loosely to it. That would be all my Christmases would come at once if people found that that's what they took away from the book.
Awesome. Yeah. So last question for me, if you have anything else to add after this, so slightly different take on the last question that I asked, but what do you hope for Christians who read your book? And obviously there may be some who are not Christians who read this too, but we're specifically thinking Christians. And if you want to touch on non-Christians as well, and how might they more fruitfully engage? Like, we're not trying to separate ourselves from culture. We're not trying to just set an antithesis or just say we're just adding on top. So there's like you said, there's a tension there with these various cultures they live in, and as they find their life wrapped in the redemptive story of Jesus Christ. So what do you hope for Christians who read this book, and maybe for non-Christians too?
I guess that people will get very different things out of the book, and I don't want to be prescriptive.
Totally.
About what people ought to find in it. I think one of the things that I've got from it, perhaps that's the easiest way for me to answer this, is it's given me a confidence to be on the front foot culturally as a Christian. Not to feel always
not just being defensive.
Completely, that our role is to defend the Bible or God against the latest attacks that are coming their way from the culture, which I think is sort of the default position these days. But actually to be on the front foot and saying that there's something really precious and new to a lot of people's ears. And, they won't have heard these ideas before in the culture, and constructive and challenging to bring to the table of the hot button issues that are animating our culture today, and that people are debating, in the newspapers, on the television. The Bible has some really profound and engaging things to say about that. And it's got a positive vision to set forth for society. It's not the only thing the Bible does. It is, also makes us wise for salvation through faith. It's God breathed and so forth. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we want to reduce the Bible to this, but in addition, the Bible also sets forth this powerful, positive vision for a society, for a modern society that works. And I would love people to go away thinking, praising God for his wisdom, I suppose, that a text that was written 2,000 years ago could still be so contemporary, and have such a powerful and positive vision to put. And what I hope a few people go away thinking, perhaps undergraduates, perhaps people working in academia, perhaps people working in the cultural industries, is, well, that was interesting, but I think I could probably do better. I want to fill a hole that this book didn't cover.
Okay.
I want to bring my particular expertise and experience to bear on, fleshing out a Christian cultural theory in a way that this book didn't touch. So a little bit of dissatisfaction at the end, I don't think is a bad thing.
Yeah, no,
and I would just encourage people, if you see something, if you see a hole in the book, if you've read it and you think, oh, I'm not quite sure I'd do it that way, then do it your way. let's
so you can read it. You're like, oh, this is a way I didn't think about.
Yeah, completely. And if people go away thinking I could do a better job, then I think that would be fantastic. I would love to see more and more of this sort of work, because I think it's so important. It's important for the church that there are Christians thinking in these ways. I guess how much has Augustine blessed us over the centuries?
Yeah, totally.
And it's it's important, not wanting to sort of over stress the blow our own trumpet, but I think it's also important for society at large that Christians are engaging in these debates, because there is something different that the Bible brings to the table, and if that's missing, then it's a shame. From our public debates. So yeah, that's what I hope people might go away with.
That's awesome. Yeah, I don't know, Nick, if you have any other questions if that jogged up for you.
No, I mean, that was refreshingly humble what you said. Just like
I don't ever hear that response from authors. Like, no, they don't say like I'm the end all be all, but they're like they don't usually open it up for like, please do better than my book, which is, it's refreshing to hear. Because we want to serve the church and we want to give the church more resources, not just a single resource. It's really refreshing.
And also, this is such a vast area that one person's only ever going to, know
people have specialties.
So I'm a specialist in modern French and European thought, and I can talk a bit about that. There's whole disciplines I've hardly got a clue about, and that other people need to go and write those books.
Totally, yeah.
Well, it's appropriate that you're. This book is encouraging people to add more to it, to bring their experiences to it, and that echoes your book by engaging with culture. So you're kind of
be Biblical Critical Theory Volume 2 from whoever writes it.
So
I don't know, Dr. Watkin, is there anything else that we missed that you want to help our listeners kind of drive home, or a nuance that we missed that you'd like to talk about?
Look, I think we've probably taken enough of our listeners' time. They've been very generous with their time. Let's not trespass on it too much.
Awesome. Well, cool. Thank you so much for coming on, adding to this conversation, helping Christians think better, not just say like, this isn't for me, or we're above this. There's a nuance in this that I think we have to engage with our culture. But thank you so much for writing this. Thank you for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Peter and Nick, it's been an absolute joy for me. I've loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.